Students, my name is Anubhav Sharma and I will be your faculty for Indian polity. In this module, we will be studying about democracy. Now, students, if you remember in my last module, what we have discussed is about some of the basic things about constitution, and we are actually continuing with it. In fact, in my last module, I had told you that there are some questions, the source of which is not Lakshmikant. The point being, there are few chapters which pertains to basics of Indian Constitution, and we do not find them in any standard book like Lakshmikant. But when we actually have a deeper look into it, we see that these questions, the source is mainly the NCRTs. Keeping that in mind, the first three modules are designed in a way in which we have taken some of the important aspects from the NCRT, and let me assure you, there will be at least one question which will be statement based, which will come from the three modules that we are discussing. Keeping that in mind, let's start with our second module. And students, in this module, we are discussing about democracy, right? So the first question is, what exactly do we mean by democracy? What exactly is the simple definition of democracy? Students, essentially what we need to keep in mind with respect to democracy is that for democracy to happen, the most basic thing which must happen are twofold. First, the representatives are elected by the people, that is, the set of people who are ruling the country will need to be elected by the people of that country. And second, there must be a high degree of freedom available to the citizens. That is, these freedoms cannot be taken away by the government, by the state, by the elected representatives. So, what exactly I'll be trying to say that for any democracy to happen, for any country to call itself democratic, it must be able to come good on at least two parameters. First, the mode of election of their representatives should be democratic, that is, they are being directly elected by the people of the country. And second, the people of that country should be given certain inalienable rights, certain freedoms which cannot be taken away from them even by the elected representatives. So let's read this slide here. That democracy is a form of government that allows people to choose their rulers, a point which I just covered. In democracy, two things needs to happen. First, only leaders elected by people should rule the country. And second, people have the freedom to express views, freedom to organize, freedom to protest, freedom to choose their religion, freedom of conscience, freedom to move from one place to another, so on and so forth. Essentially, what we are talking about is liberty, right? But another thing that you need to keep in mind is that democracy doesn't mean happening of these two things. That is, it doesn't mean that if these two things are present, then we have understood democracy. Certainly not. Democracy is about establishing democratic ethos, democratic systems, and ensuring that these systems follow the values of democracy. For example, secularism, equity, for example, federalism, for example, everything that we see in Indian Constitution where we are trying to establish an order for society on democratic values. Separation of power is another example of this. We will look into it one by one, right? This brings us to the second aspect, that is what exactly are the important features of any democracy. If we are talking about democracy, it must be having certain features. We need to understand what exactly are the features of democracy. So essentially, the first important feature is the decision making powers. What exactly are we trying to say when we say decision making powers? Look, it is not necessary for any society to have elected representatives so as to govern them. For example, we have countries where monarchical system dictatorship is happening. The Nazi Germany of Hitler was one example of that, where dictatorship was happening. The idea is that in democracy, dictatorship or monarchical way of governing cannot happen, and decision making can be endowed only to those set of people who have followed a democratic way of getting elected. In India, we know that idea of decision making rests upon the elected representative, be it MP, be it MLA, or for that matter, in local elections, the PRI institutions. So let's get on with it. In some countries, there are elected leaders. However, final decision making power does not rest with them. This happens in dictatorship and monarchies, right? In democracy, final decision making power must rest with people who are elected by the people themselves, that is, who the citizens elect their representative, and these representatives get endowed with decision making power, which now people will need to follow. Coming to the second part, what exactly is the second most important feature of democracy? That is free and fair electoral competition, that is free and fair elections. Now, there are two things that we are discussing here. One is free elections, and second, fair elections. What exactly do we mean by that? Look, when we talk about free election, essentially what we are trying to say is that the people who will participate in the election, both as a candidate and as the people who would be voting, there must be a system which can be called as free. By free, what I mean is that all people of an age above that age should be qualified to vote. The access to vote should be present to all the voters in a uniform manner. For example, if there is a voter in Bihar who is eligible to vote, of course, and if there is a voter in Tamil Nadu, the idea should be both of them are having reasonably same access with respect to going to a polling booth and vote. Another aspect of free election is availability of political alternatives. What exactly am I trying to explain you here? Look, students, when we talk about election and that too free, what we want is there should be alternatives to choose from. By political alternatives, what we are trying to say is that alternatives which is not just in terms of people or parties, but also in terms of ideologies. And when we look around the world, what exactly do we see? We see that there are right wing parties, there are communist parties, there are left wing parties, there are parties which call themselves as Democrats. So there are parties which call themselves as liberals. So essentially, the idea of having such a vibrant political alternative is also a very important aspect of democracy. And any society which wants itself to establish as a good well functioning democracy should actually create those opportunities for different political parties to come up and give options to the people, right? Another important aspect with respect to free elections is with respect to provision of removal of the elected representatives. That is, let's say people, citizens decide like these are the representatives which should be representing us in Lok Sabha. Among those representatives, we form the government. This government will now rule for next few years. They will be taking decisions, and the idea is they would be taking decisions for the welfare of the people. But let's say citizens believe that this government hasn't functioned as well as it should have. As such, it should be removed. Thus, there should be a procedure established in any democratic country by which people can remove the government. And we know in India it is by periodic elections which happens. So what do we see? In order to have free electoral competition, first thing that we require is access of voting should be there to all people who qualify a certain criteria, and of course the opportunity, the access should be uniform across the length and breadth of that country, right? Second thing, that there must be political alternatives that should be available to the people among which they can vote. It should certainly not be a case that we see, be it in China or for that matter Mexico, where there is a single party rule and people cannot opt for any other party but that single party. That again cannot be called as a democratic feature. Third, there should always be a provision to remove the existing government if people believe that government is not functioning well. If people believe the government has functioned well, like that we saw in 2019, the same government was again given power, right? So these are the three aspects which we need to keep in mind with respect to free elections. But then it is also called as fair election. How exactly can we call something to be fair election? Something can be called as fair election if the institution which will be managing election is accountable, is independent, and can take decisions in a manner in which it results in fairness. In respect to India, we know Election Commission of India, a constitutional body, has been endowed with responsibility of conducting elections. This body actually takes over the administration during the time of election, and the provisions are such that they do not even come under the influence of the government, so that government cannot have any undue advantage during the time of elections. What exactly are we trying to say here? What we are trying to say here is that in order for us to have free elections, we need to have some criteria. But in order for us to have fair elections, we also would need to establish an institution which is independent, autonomous, which is powerful, which can take decisions, which does not come under the government during the time of election, so that it acts in an impartial and fair manner. In fact, students, in recent times, the role that money is playing in election has been a matter of debate, and several experts believe it has really tampered with the idea of fair elections, because people with a lot of money in their kitty are having an advantage over those people who are not having that much of money at their dispense in order to fight elections. This is a debate that we will discuss about in our forthcoming lectures, but this is something certainly that you need to keep in mind. So let's just read what all are the content of this slide. In some countries like China and Mexico, elections were won only by a single party. And in these countries, opposition is not given enough space to participate in elections. The idea is that opposition should be as vibrant as the government. The job of opposition is to act as a shadow, is to keep on criticizing, to have an eagle eye on the functioning of a government to hold them accountable. And this can only happen if we have political alternatives available within the country from which people can choose from. Such elections cannot be considered as people electing the rulers, as they cannot be considered as truly fair elections. Certainly right. Elections in a democracy should offer a choice between political alternatives and allow for removal of existing rulers. I have just discussed both these points. Thus, democracy should be based on free and fair elections where those currently in power have a fair chance of losing. Again, a point that we have discussed. Now we come to the third important feature of democracy, and this feature is adult franchise. What exactly do we mean by adult franchise? Adult franchise is a very simple concept, which means that all citizens, if they are above a certain age, they can come and participate in election. That is, they can either join as a voter or they can join as a candidate in an election. Why exactly adult franchise is important for any democracy? The reason is very simple, because it brings about political equality. How exactly does it bring about political equality? Look, in any society, there will be different classes of people. These classes can be looked upon in different ways. For example, women in itself forms a class of people. Then economically rich and economically poor are also forming separate classes. Then in a country like India, caste also is a criteria on which class is getting formed. Similarly, in a country like South Africa, or for that matter, United States, race is also forming a criteria of a class. What exactly am I trying to explain you here? What I'm trying to say here is that when we give adult franchise as the criteria of voting, what we have done is to put all these classes into same category, on same power. Why? For the simple reason, all of them can come and cast their vote, and the value of each of the vote will exactly be the same. Now, students, it is very interesting to note here that during the time of Britishers, there was something called limited franchise. That is, only limited citizens were allowed to participate in elections. These citizens used to be the zamindars, people who are holding land. Then there was some criteria with respect to only students who are in college can come and vote with respect to some provincial elections, so on and so forth. Now, this is what we call as limited franchise. But then after independence, it was thought that if we truly want to be a democracy, we would need to ensure that we are establishing adult franchise. In the beginning, as we know, 21 years was taken as the age eligible for any citizen to come and vote, then it was eventually brought down to 18 years. That is, irrespective of your class, caste, creed, ethnicity, language, etc., if you are above the age of 18 years and if you have registered yourself in the electoral roll, you can come and vote in the election. I hope this point with respect to adult franchise is also clear. So let's just read the content of the slide. Political equality is considered to be the foundation of democracy. Adult franchise ensures political equality. I have just explained you how it does that. In a democracy, each adult citizen must have one vote and each vote must have one value. I hope this point is also clear. Now we come to the fourth feature of any well-functioning democracy, and that is rule of law. What is rule of law? Now, students, when we talk about democracies, essentially the idea that we are catering to is that everyone is equal. Now, if everyone is equal, then certainly there has to be a way in which we are ensuring that everyone is being treated equally, and that is done by an idea called rule of law. What exactly is rule of law? Rule of law simply says that if a law has been made, everyone will have to follow that law, and anyone who breaks it, irrespective of the class from which he comes from, he would be subjected to the same punishment. This is what we call as rule of law. The idea is that you may be an elite, you may be a poor person, you may be rich, you may be poor, you may be of a different caste. If you have broken a law, you will be subjected to the same punishment. Now, let's see some of the examples. We have examples where film stars are facing some criminal charges. Even they have to go through the same due process as a normal person would need to. Of course, in reality, there are a lot of complexities to such issues, but essentially, you need to understand that such a provision doesn't exist in some of the non-democratic countries, and even during the time of colonial Britishers in India, during which we actually saw that the British citizens were being subjected to a different kind of law, while Indians were being subjected to a different kind of law. Anyways, coming to the text, the governments elected by the people is necessity in a government in any democracy, but it is not sufficient criteria. Popularly elected governments can also become undemocratic and autocratic. Everyone should be equal in the eyes of law. The state should respect the basic rights of the citizens, and democratic government rules within the limit set by constitutional law and citizens. I hope this point is clear, that essentially what we are talking about is that we want all of them to be subjected to the same law. If you are a government employee, you are also subjected to the same law. If you are the prime minister, home minister, or for that matter, if you are the speaker, you should also be subjected to the same law as any citizen of the country. I hope this point is also clear. Now we come to the next section, and this is advantages of a democracy. What all are the advantages of having democracy? Now, there are penumbra of advantages of having a democracy, but we will concentrate on some of the important advantages, something that you need to remember for the statement based questions that are asked in prelims. Or for that matter, there could also be a question in mains examination around democracy, where again you can quote these points, as these points have been directly taken from the NCRTs. Coming to the first advantage of democracy, and that advantage is accountability. What is accountability? Accountability, simply put, means answerability. What exactly are we holding the representatives, the government accountable for? Simply put, there are two things for which the government, or for that matter, any public body, will be held accountable for. What are these two things? The first is with respect to the decisions they take. The decisions which any government should take must be in conformity to the law of the land, must be in conformity to the constitutional norms. If it is not in conformity to it, we will hold them accountable. For example, if legislature legislates on a matter where it contravenes, it violates any provisions in the constitution, they will be held accountable under the system of judicial review by the judiciary, right? In the same way, we had the case of NJAC. NJAC, where the government had passed a law with respect to appointment of judges, and this NJAC rule was struck down by Supreme Court because Supreme Court held in its wisdom it to be in violative of the basic structure of Indian Constitution. What exactly has happened? Legislature was held accountable for its action. Another good example is with respect to the Aadhaar judgment. In Aadhaar, if you remember, government had taken several steps and it had made Aadhaar mandatory for several public services, which even included admission of your child in a school, which included Aadhaar being necessary at the time of getting your birth certificate. Even for that certificate, Aadhaar was being made mandatory. For buying SIM card, Aadhaar was being made mandatory. Anyway, so Supreme Court said when you are making something like Aadhaar to be mandatory for the people to access simple basic services, essentially what you're doing is to violate their Article 21 because their liberty is getting violated. Their right to privacy is getting violated. We will of course study that in detail when we study about fundamental rights, but I hope you're able to understand that government was held accountable for the decision it had taken, and for that decision, since it was illegal, it was struck down. There is another way or another reason why we need to hold government accountable, and that is with respect to their performance. It is not enough that if we have elected you, you must do only things that are legal. We are also expecting our government to perform on certain criteria. What exactly can be those criteria? Simply put, it can be GDP growth. It can be with respect to poverty alleviation. It could be with respect to steps government has taken in order to increase and better the educational infrastructure of the country. It could be with respect to the jobs that are being created in the country. So these all are parameters in which we want to test the performance of a government, and thus we will hold them accountable. How exactly do we do so? While there are different ways to do so, the most direct and simple way is by use of elections. During the time of election, we will assess the work done by any government, and then we will determine whether this government should be given another tenure or should we go for new representatives. I hope this point is also clear. Accountability. Democracy is better than any other form of government in responding to the needs of the people. This is possible because multi-party system, opposition, and free press make the government accountable to its actions. Now, let me just explain the second point in detail so that there is more clarity to it. So, essentially, what we have discussed is what exactly is accountability and what exactly are we holding the government accountable for. But how exactly can we hold them accountable? That is, one thing is why we need accountability, but the other thing is how exactly can we hold them accountable? I gave you one simple example of elections, but there could be other ways also. For example, media. If we have free and vibrant media, media can ask question on behalf of people. It can raise the issues, and then the government can be held accountable. In the same way, when we read about the parliament, we will read about certain parliamentary proceedings where the parliamentarians are holding the executive accountable. That is, the legislature is holding executive accountable for their actions. This can be done by the use of budget. We see that also being done with respect to parliamentary committees that are being formed. We will discuss that in detail, but the point that you need to keep in mind is that even legislature is holding executive accountable. Then another point that we discussed was with respect to judicial review. What exactly is happening in judicial review? Judiciary is holding both executive accountable for its action, the way we saw that in Aadhaar, and then judiciary is holding legislature accountable for what it legislates. The example that I gave you was with respect to NJAC. I hope this point is abundantly clear that accountability is one of the main advantages of democracy, something which cannot be seen in other form of governance, be it single party rule or dictatorship or monarchical system, right? Now we come to the second advantage of democracy. What is that advantage? That advantage pertains to quality of decisions that are being taken. Now, of course, this advantage can be looked upon as subjective, but let me still explain it to you. Look, the idea is pretty simple. If we are taking decisions which affects a very big country, all the people who are living in the country, the last thing that we want is that decision has been taken in a manner which is imprudent, that hasn't gone through consultation, that hasn't gone through discussions and debate. In order to ensure that discussion happen, consultation happen, we need to establish those mechanisms. When we look at democratic countries, what we see that there are these mechanisms which has been established within them. For example, if I take the example of India, what we see is that in parliament there is a process with respect to introduction of a bill, discussion of a bill, voting of a bill. What we also see is that there are ways in which opposition are able to raise their concerns, opposition are able to raise the criticism. The same happens with the media. They are also scrutinizing the bills and legislation, the decisions taken by the government, right? Then we also see the era of coalition government where government in power needs to take support of other political parties which actually might be against their political ideology. As such, they need to come in terms with certain aspects of the bill which everyone is agreeing to, and we need to take away those things which everyone is not agreeing to, or at least some people that are necessary for that bill to get passed are not agreeing to. So what exactly is happening in democracy? In democracy, what is happening is that first, for any decision to be taken, there is a process. That process in itself is democratic. Second, that process involves including all stakeholders. Third, if in democracy we have a coalition government, what we see is that all political parties will need to chip in, and consensus needs to be built with respect to any bill or any decision which needs to be taken by the government. Then only the decision can be taken. On one hand, it makes decision making on the slower side, but on the other hand, one can see that the quality of decisions will always be better than decisions taken in kind of urgency or without thinking it through. Now, one of the criticism of democracy, more so in a coalition government, is policy paralysis. That essentially means because you just want to pass bill, you would need to get a lot of parties on board. At times, we are not able to get policies passed. At times, we are not able to get important legislations passed. Something that doesn't happen when we talk about single party rule, that is one party being in majority in a democracy like that we see in last 6 years. But then when we assess the performance, we see that even during the time of coalition government, the performance of the government was good. And during the times of single party being in power, be it at the time of Indira Gandhi or be it in current times when we criticize something like demonetization, or for that matter during the time of Indira Gandhi, the decisions on national emergency, what we see is that decisions can happen in a haste manner which can bring more loss to the country than good to the country. As such, in any democracy, quality of decisions will take some time, but indeed will be more prudent, will be more effective as compared to a non democratic country. I hope this point is also clear. Then we come to the third advantage of democracy, and that is with respect to unity in diversity. What exactly do we mean by unity in diversity? Students, just think about it. India is a country where we have people not just of different religions, but of different caste, of different languages, of different ethnic background, of different sections, be it economic section, for that matter, political section, so on and so forth. In such a country, we would want a system by which no person is actually feeling left out. Every section believes that they are included in the decision making. And just because one section of the society is in majority, majoritarianism is not happening. Now, you may be wondering, like in democracy, we talk about rule of majority. Then what is wrong in majoritarianism? The idea in itself is different. The idea of rule of majority in democracy is that there are some democratic principles which needs to be adhered to, and what exactly should be the decision must be made on these democratic principles. In order to take these decisions, what we require is people to understand the democratic principles, to vote for those representatives who will be able to ensure these democratic principles are being implemented in the rightful manner, and then rule of majority in a democracy happens. But when we talk about majoritarianism, essentially what we are talking about is that if in any society one community is in majority, whatever that community wants must be accepted by the other community. And that is not the definition of democracy, because in democracy, we talk about secularism, we talk about equity, we talk about fairness, affirmative action, so on, so forth. We again will understand them better when we look at some of the previous year judgments, when we understand some of the amendments to the constitution, and that will happen in the course of this lecture series, right? Democracy addresses concerns of diverse groups of the population. In a multiple diverse country, there is always scope for differences and conflicts between the people. Such differences arises due to existence of people from different regions, languages, and caste, a point that I just covered. Such differences can be resolved peacefully only in a democratic system, because in a democratic system, all sections are able to get their say, all sections feel protected. Like when we talk about Indian Constitution, there are articles like Article 24, Article 25, Article 26, which essentially gives you right to religion, right to conscience. The idea is that your right to religion conscience cannot be abridged by any action of the government, and Constitution promises that we will protect it at any cost. Thus, what we have done is to give confidence in the mind of people of minority community that your religion and your minority affairs will not be affected by any decisions which a government might be taking. And this is where democracy comes in, and this is how it is different from majoritarianism. This again is an important concept, if not for prelims, but of course for mains examination. So students, please make a note of it and keep it in mind, right? This brings us to the next topic, that is power sharing in a democracy. What exactly do we mean by power sharing in a democracy? Now, one of the things that we have discussed is that in democracy, essentially what we are doing is to elect our representatives. These representatives then get power to rule, govern the people, countrymen. As such, what has happened? What has happened is that we have given a part of our power to some elected representatives, and these people now have been given authority. This authority is finding its legitimacy from the vote that they got, the majority number, the share of vote that they were able to receive, and thus they were able to form a government. Essentially, what has happened is they now have the power to govern us. But then, this power, if it is unbridled, if it is unchecked, it may result in the government in itself becoming autocratic. Thus, we need to ensure that there is a form of power sharing that is happening, by which we can hold in every section of the government, every section of the state accountable. There are different ways in which this power sharing happens, and this again is an important aspect that we need to study both for prelims as well as for mains exam. Let's understand them one by one. The first thing that we need to understand is why exactly do we need power sharing, and there are two important points that we need to keep in mind. Why exactly do we need power sharing? The first reason is power sharing helps to reduce the possibility of conflict between social groups. Now, in any democratic government, due respect is given to diverse groups and views that exist in a society. Everyone has a voice in the shaping of public policies. Therefore, democracy, political power is to be distributed among as many citizens as possible. Let me explain it to you again. This is quite similar to what we have just discussed. When we talk about any society, what we see that there is a section which is in majority while there is a section which is in minority. There is every chance that because of sheer number, the majority section can start using its numbers in a way in which it is trying to subjugate, is trying to suppress the minority. Thus, what we require is to ensure that minority is empowered enough to not let their affairs be affected by criteria or by the force of majority. Now, the idea majority minority is just one way to look at it. It can also be looked upon as caste dynamics, because there is an elite caste, there is a caste which has been undergoing suppression, undergoing all sorts of atrocities. At that time, also, we need to ensure that power sharing is happening in such a manner where we are able to ensure equity, and the people who have been suppressed for so long have power in a manner in which they can voice their opinion, in which they can be a part of the polity. One such example is reservation. We will talk about that in this course of lecture itself. What is reservation? Reservation is one of the ways in which power has been conferred to the weak community, by which they can come up and be a part of the mainstream. I hope you're able to understand what exactly are we trying to say with respect to the first point, that power sharing is required because it helps to reduce the possibility of conflict between social groups. It is ensuring that every social group are getting that share of power by which they are being a part of the mainstream of the democratic polity that we are talking about. सब लोग बराबरी की तरफ बढ़ पा रहे हैं, ये एंडेवर होता है पावर शेयरिंग से, जो डेमोक्रेसी का एक इंपॉर्टेंट भाग है, राइट? Then the second reason why power sharing is important, power sharing is the very spirit of democracy. What exactly are we trying to say here? Look, what is democracy? Democracy is rule of the people, rule by the people, rule for the people, right? The idea is that the power should be shared in a manner in which, while some of the power has been given to the elected representatives, that could be with respect to lawmaking powers, but still there are some powers which the citizen is still keeping reserved for himself. This could be in terms of powers that it reserves as in identity of being a community, or for that matter, the power an individual reserves in identity of being an individual. Let me give you an example. As I just explained, we have certain articles which gives religious freedom and right to both community as well as individual. On the other hand, we have rights with respect to Article 14, equality before law, equality of opportunity, that one can argue is more an individualistic right. Article 19 that talks about freedom of expression. So what exactly have we done? That while we in democracy have elected a representative, we have made them the government, they are taking decisions, they have the power to take decisions, they do not have absolute power, they cannot make decisions with respect to violation of our fundamental rights, they cannot take decisions with respect to violation of my religious right as a community. Thus a kind of power sharing has happened. I hope this point is also clear, right? People have the right to be consulted and how they are being governed. A legitimate government is one where citizens, through participation, acquire a stake in the system, right? The stake by which the citizen, the way in which they are able to acquire the stake is by by the way of fundamental rights. In my example, just a side note here, while it may not be directly linked here, but it's something which will help you for your mains exam, that the idea of right-based approach of policy making is also centered around shifting the power dynamics from the government to that of people. For example, when we talk about a policy like MG Narega, there is a provision of legal enforceability. In the same way, when we talk about a policy like RTI, what we say is that within a stipulated time, if the information is not being provided, then actions can be taken with respect to that that PIU, right? What exactly are we trying to say? That the idea of right-based approach is actually to change the dynamics of power sharing, where more power is being endowed to citizens. The same is with respect to citizen charter. The same is with respect to consumer rights that we are talking about. So this again is a concept that is linked with power sharing that we are discussing right now. One basic principle of democracy is that people are the source of all political power. In a democracy, people rule themselves through institutions of self governance. I hope this point is also clear. This brings us to the next part, that is, what exactly are the different forms of power sharing? What are the ways in which power sharing can happen? The first way is among the different organs of government. Let me simply explain it to you. What we're trying to say here is that when we elect someone, when we are creating the idea of state, what we are doing is to endow them some powers. On one hand, we have discussed some of the powers that a citizen is reserving for himself. On the other hand, we have also discussed power that has been given to the state. Let's just restrict our idea of power only with respect to state for now. Now, state has a lot of power, power which pertains to making law, power with respect to delivering judgment on the cases, power with respect to implementation, that is law and order implementation, policy implementation. One of the more prudent ways to go about in terms of ensuring that this power which now the state has is not getting abused is to ensure there is separation of power. What do we mean by that? What we will do is that we will create different organs, and different organs will be given different powers. The idea is that if different organs have different categories of power, they can have a check and balance among them. If legislature is doing something which is against the constitutional norm, judiciary can check. If executive is doing something which is against the constitutional norms, then legislature can check. If judiciary is not doing its job in a proper manner, then legislature or has the power, at least in spirit, to appoint judges, and thus they can also affect how exactly judgment or other judiciary is functioning. I hope you are able to get the point that I'm trying to say here. That what we have done is that we assess that there is a lot of power that state has. In order to make sure that there is separation of power, what we did is to categorize into three categories. First was legislature. This body will be given the power only to legislate laws. In India, we have state legislative assembly at state level, and we have Lok Sabha at parliament level, where people elect their representatives and they will be making laws. Then we have executive, which is nothing but the government. Government's job is to implement the policies made by the legislature and also pass some executive orders. And then we have judicial powers, for which we created the institution of judiciary. We have three-tier judiciary: Supreme Court, High Court, lower courts. The idea of judiciary is to have judicial review on the decisions taken by legislature as well as by executive, to ensure everything is happening with respect to the framework of Indian Constitution. This is the first way in which the sharing of power can happen. And the point to note here is that every organ is keeping a check on the other organ. And secondly, what we are actually witnessing is a horizontal distribution of power, because all of them are at the same plane. This arrangement is called systems of checks and balances. I hope this point is also clear. Now, there is another way in which power sharing can happen, and this time it would be with respect to different governments at different levels. Let me explain it to you. Just look at India as a country. India is a huge country. There are a number of states. Every state has its unique identity which is not limited only with respect to the people, but also with respect to the language that is being spoken, the ethnicity, the dynamics of the population, literacy level, so on and so forth. Essentially, what we are trying to say here is that while we would need governance to happen for the country, we would also need specific and clinical governance to happen with respect to every state, because the demands and requirement of that state would be different. As such, governance model and steps that the government should take with respect to that particular state will also vary. Thus, what we require is a form where there are two types of governments which are functioning. The first government is functioning at the center level. That is, that will be a government which will govern the whole country. Today, we see BJP-led NDA government to be in power. They are the government who are taking decisions for the whole of country. At the same time, we would also want a government which will be a state government. That is, a government which is operating within the state and taking those decisions which is necessary for the welfare of the people living in that state. This government is called state government. Let me give you a very simple example. Now, when we look at the government in Maharashtra, it is a coalition government of number of parties, right? At the same time, at the center, we have a different government which is being led by BJP. So what we have are two different governments at two different levels. At center, we have central government. At state, we have state government. But how exactly will they function? The idea is that what we would do is to share powers among them. Some powers will be given to a center, some power will be given to the state. This is ensured by the state list and center list, the subjects on which state will have supremacy over, and subjects on which center would have supremacy over the state. The whole idea is that what we have done is to share the powers among state and center. A very simple example is law and order maintenance comes within the ambit of state's power. That is, it will be the duty of state to ensure law and order maintenance. The police will report to the state government, right? But when we talk about national defense, when we talk about communication, that is a power, that is a subject that comes under the center list. That is, center will have all the authority to rule on matters of defense policies, or for that matter, steps to be taken for national security. I hope this point is also clear that essentially what we have done is to create different levels of government, and thus we have a union government, then we have a state government, and we now know that after 73rd and 74th Amendment of Indian Constitution, we also have local government, that is municipalities and panchayats. Municipalities will include other bodies under them, and panchayat will include other bodies under it. What exactly are we noticing here? that unlike the first form of power sharing, where there was horizontal sharing of power happening between three organs, here there is a vertical sharing of power that is happening between different levels of government. I hope this point is also clear, right? Now we come to the third way in which power sharing can happen. And students, this is a very interesting point, so please pay attention to it. Power is something by which you are able to bring about a change. Now, in any society, when we look at it, there is inherent inequality embedded in it. So when we talk about democracy, generally we talk about equality. But just think about it. If there is inherent inequality in a society, equal opportunities may not be enough in order to give level playing grounds to people who are backward, people who are depressed, people who do not have the same access. For example, if we say that every student who takes admission in a school will have to pay the same fees, let's say 10,000 rupees per annum, while one can see that equality has happened because for every person, every child, the fees is absolutely same, but it will result in perpetuation of inequality because only the rich or the people who have the capacity to pay 10,000 will be able to get access to education, while the people who do not have access to education will not be able to do so. As such, what we are trying to say here is that democracy is not just about political equality, but it is also about bringing about a social equity. That is, to create those ways, those steps, those decisions by which we are able to uplift the people who are backward and give them more power in order to uplift themselves. This power is called as affirmative action taken by state, and the very simple and very obvious example of it is reservation. What exactly is happening in reservation? That we have done is to reserve some seats for a certain community, and this community will bring the representation to the bureaucracy or to different levels of government jobs, by which what we are able to do, we are able to ensure that there is equity which is happening. Here is an image which also gives the same idea that I'm trying to explain here, that if we are giving the three people of different heights the same stool to stand on, only two of them are able to see. The first one, who is the tall one, which we call as elite, has simple access to it. In fact, even if this person doesn't have a stool, he would still be able to watch the match. This kid, who is slightly shorter in height, let's call him middle class, this person is able to get it, and we can see the reason why he needs it. For the reason, if he doesn't have this tool, he'll not be able to watch the match. This kid, who is among the most poorest or the most depressed class because of the height, this person will not be able to watch the match even when we have given him one stool. What is required is that we take this stool from this gentleman and give it to this child. What exactly will happen? That this person is still able to see the match. This kid, because he already had a stool, is able to see the match. But this kid, now with the excess of that extra stool, is also able to see the match. And now we are able to ensure proper social equality to occur by the way of equity, and we have done so by the use of affirmative action. I hope this point is also clear. This is a very important point that we need to keep in mind. So let's just go into the text. Power may also be shared among different social groups, such as religious and linguistic groups, that the groups that we need to identify so that we are able to give them some power is socially weaker sections like women. In fact, there is a bill with respect to women reservation in parliament that has been pending. The nature of the bill basically is that while we have about 50% of the population in women, their representation is not the same when we talk about in legislation. As such, what we require is affirmative action by which we ensure that at least 33% of the women are getting elected in the Lok Sabha. That is 33% of the seats in Lok Sabha are reserved only for women, right? The system of reserved constituencies in assemblies and the parliament of our country is an example. This type of arrangement is meant to give space in the government and administration to diverse social groups who otherwise would feel alienated from the government. As I said, like this kid is feeling alienated for the reason that he is not able to see the match. Government may say that we have given equal access to all, but that equal access in an unequal society will not result in social upliftment of the weaker sections. This method is used to give minority communities a fair share in power, right? Then there is another way in which power sharing happens, and this is with respect to different social groups that get formed in society. Let me just explain it to you because it's not very complicating. Essentially, what we see that in society, there are several social groups that are getting formed. That could be interest groups, that could be traders, that could be businessmen who are forming their own lobbies. We also see people who are getting together and forming those associations which caters to a purpose. For example, PETA is one organization, then Amnesty International has certain objectives and people are getting together for that objective. Then we also have an Association of Democratic Reforms that again is an NGO which is working towards a goal. All these associations, all these NGOs, all these interest groups are trying to create kind of pressure on the government to take actions with respect to some aspects. A very simple example is with respect to the Lokpal bill, which got passed during the time of Manmohan Singh government. What exactly had happened during that time? During that time, what had happened was that people started asserting in terms of forming association that they want a bill of the nature of Lokpal. And then what we saw that government had to respond and they had to make a bill on it. In the same way, we had the Aradhya bill. There again, we saw that there was a public outrage with respect to the rape that had happened in Delhi, and due to which government felt the pressure, felt the heat, and they had to create stringent laws with respect to harassment of women. Right? What exactly are we trying to say here? What we are trying to say here is that there could be different ways in which people can get together. They can form association. These association will cater to a purpose for which that association has been formed. For example, PETA is working towards welfare of the animals, right? And then they start putting pressure on the government with respect to certain policies they need to work on, right? In the same way, what we have is associations of business community traders like PFCII, BFPICI. What all are these? These are associations of the businessmen in India, the traders in India, and what they essentially do is to pass such resolutions by which, on one hand, they are able to bring about some degree of corporate governance, but on the other hand, they are also trying to communicate to the government the kind of policy framework they are looking for, be it in terms of manufacturing framework, be it in terms of taxation framework, so on, so forth. I hope this point is also clear that power sharing arrangements can also be seen in way of political parties, pressure groups, and movements to control or influence those powers, those in power, right? I hope this point is also clear. Please do go through this slide. Then we talk about constraints. Why exactly am I talking about constraints? Now, one of the things that we have discussed in both modules, module 1 as well as in module 2, is freedom. What exactly have we discussed in freedom? That freedom is essentially a way in which we are able to make the citizen free of constraints. You would think, like logically, freedom means that the citizen should have absence of constraints, but actually, that is not the case. There has to be some degree of constraints, and even the constituent makers, the Constitution Assembly, also had acknowledged it. In India, we call it as reasonable restrictions, reasonable constraints. Let me just elaborate on it. Now, let's see. We have freedom of expression that indeed we have. We can talk about several things. We can talk about the opinions that we have with respect to social issues. But our freedom of expression cannot be extended to a point where we start being abusive to another. That is, if we start abusing to someone, we are being abusive to someone. If you're abusing someone, if you're writing some crass comment on that person, this certainly cannot be qualified as the right way to exercise this freedom. Thus, though we have given you this freedom, it needs to be in context of democratic ethos. That is, it should not be affecting freedom of someone else. Thus, a certain restriction needs to be put in this freedom. For example, with respect to this example, that is Article 19, freedom of expression, while everyone has freedom to express their opinion, they do not have the freedom to spread hate. Hate speech is an example of that. That hate speech doesn't mean that you have freedom of expression, so you can just come out and spew venom among different social groups for your political interest or any interest for that matter. Or for that matter, it doesn't mean that you start being abusive to one another or to others. Thus, what have we understood again? What we have understood is there is a need for a kind of constraint for every kind of freedom, right? Freedom is absence of constraint. It enables an individual to make independent decisions, but this is just one dimension of freedom. Freedom should also enable an individual to express themselves and enhance their potential. This should enable people to develop their creativity and capabilities. In fact, students, this is the point on which one of the questions of UPSC was asked, I think 2 years back, and a lot of people were confused and they weren't sure of the answer. And the funny thing was, it was in the NCRT, but still people were looking in different sources to find an answer for it. Then, coming to the next point, both these dimensions are important. A free society should help all individuals to develop their potential with minimum constraints. But constraints are important. Why? For the reason that the constraint can happen in different ways. Constraint can happen by the constraints which is being imposed by the society. For example, caste system is one example. Another way in which constraint can be done is by a democratic government, where we call it to be reasonable, because the idea of a democratic government imposing constraints is to ensure that liberty of the people by and large is getting protected. A very simple example of that I gave was with respect to freedom of expression. That certainly I can talk about issues, I can express my opinion, but that doesn't mean I start being abusive. So government will put certain restrictions on my freedom of expression, but again, it needs to be reasonable. It cannot be that government is outrightly curbing my freedom of expression. And this is where we have seen a lot of cases that has gone to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court has deliberated on it. Right? Constraints must be reasonable and justifiable in nature. Authority that imposes these restrictions need to be acceptable to all. That is, people should be able to see reason with respect to the reasonable restriction that has been put on their freedom, on their rights. Right? In Indian Constitution, such restrictions or constraints are called reasonable restrictions. These restrictions must be capable of being defended by reason. That is, whenever government is asked upon why exactly have you put this restriction, they should be able to explain it. Secondly, it should not be excessive. That is, it should not be outright violation of someone's freedom, outright curbing of someone's freedom. It should not be excessive. That is, not out of proportion to the action being restricted. If you are trying to restrict some action, you need to ensure that that action is being restricted only in a sensible manner, in a proportional manner, in a reasonable manner. A simple example is that of Aadhaar bill. When it was brought to the notice of Supreme Court asked what exactly is the logic of having Aadhaar as a mandatory condition for someone to buy a SIM card, and government wasn't quite able to explain that. As such, what government was doing in its step of making Aadhaar mandatory for buying of SIM card was to interfere in someone's freedom with respect to right to privacy. So, they weren't able to defend with a reasonable explanation. As such, this provision was taken away by Supreme Court. I hope you are able to see the logic that I'm trying to tell you, that while constraints are necessary, it needs to be reasonable, and government should always have reasons to be able to justify it. This is all that we had for this lecture. Essentially, what we have done is to discuss all important things that we need to know with respect to democracy. And students, let me tell you, all these parts are very, very necessary for statement-based questions that are being asked in UPSC, mainly in the polity part. For more such videos, do log into scholar.in. Thank you.